announce what was happening in the House of Representatives. It struck me, at least, that that's not a constructive nor a productive way to get where we need to go in the next few hours. So I hope we can do that, and I'm looking forward to the kind of bipartisan cooperation that will solve this problem. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
I would ask that I could use as much time as I might consume.
Without objection.
Madam President, the senator from South Dakota has pointed out how concerned he is about jobs, about economic growth. He's concerned about our not doing enough appropriations bills. He's concerned that we haven't resolved our differences in the conference. I want him to know, since he asked for bipartisanship, I'm concerned as a Democrat about pay and jobs and economic growth, and I'm concerned that we haven't had any appropriations bills, and I'm concerned that we haven't gone to the budget. But I need to speak the truth. And the truth is in the record. Why don't we have appropriations bills? Because the Republicans filibustered our very first bill, and when we tried to get it done, they wouldn't give us the votes, and it was taken off the floor. And Senator Murray and Senator Collins, our moderate Republican colleague, were very upset about that. The Republicans filibustered the very first appropriations bill that we tried to get through. And it was clear they were going to continue to filibuster each one. So to come down here and lament the fact that we didn't take up appropriations bills flies in the face of recent history. Now, my friend laments the fact that we haven't had a chance to discuss what he now sees as a target for cuts, Medicare and Social Security, calls them entitlement programs. That's their new thing now. They want to cut those programs. Well, you know what? We've said, Madam President, open up the government, pay our bills, we'll negotiate, we'll listen, we'll talk. 21 times our friends on the Republican side stopped us from going to a budget conference. And now they've shut down the government. And all you have to do is understand why. They were very clear. They don't like the Affordable Care Act. So I've come to the floor, as I have before during this government shutdown, that's in its 15th day, to raise the alarm about the harmful, terrible, hurtful impacts on America and its people as a result of 15 days of not having access to their government. Who are they punishing, Madam President? The people of this nation. This is their government. Open up the door, let them in, let them talk to us, let them tell us about the legislation they want us to proceed to. Let them not suffer, as they are in my state and in many states, because the government is shut down. And I'll talk about some of the ways my people are hurting. So they shut down the government because they didn't like the Affordable Care Act. And I'm going to say, can I have those statistics? I'm so happy to say that coveredcalifornia.com, coveredca.com, which is our website, has had more than 1,500,000 unique visits to the site. The call volume to the service centers, 104,000 plus. The average call wait time now is 1 minute and 55 seconds. The average call handling time from the time you get on to the time you get off and get your questions answered is less than 15 minutes. And our cumulative applications are approaching 100,000. Tens of thousands have already completed the sign-ups. So this is why they shut down the government. They don't want this to move forward. I'll tell you some stories about health care reform in my state. Rakesh Ricky of San Jose is now paying $950 a month to insure himself, his wife, and his 2 children with Kaiser Permanente. According to NBC station in the Bay Area, Rakesh was stunned to learn that through Covered California, he can get a similar Kaiser plan for his family for $400 less a month. So when my friend stands here and says, premiums are going up, ask Rakesh. He's getting a plan for his family for $400 less a month. So he quickly did the math. He found out when he hung up the phone and signed up, he's saving $5,000 a year. Why do the Republicans want to shut down the government and stop somebody like that from getting a plan? I think they have to look into their hearts. Rakesh owns an auto repair shop. He has 4 employees. He's hoping with the savings he'll be able to offer his workers medical insurance. He cannot wait to sign up, complete the application, and he looks forward to feeling relief from the financial pain of skyrocketing insurance costs. Then there's Laura Hunt of Modesto. She lost her husband's employer base coverage when he was killed in a car crash in 2006. She is suffering from income loss and painful loss of a spouse. She contacted Covered California and found out she could have an Anthem Blue Cross policy for a net cost of $23 a month. Why do my friends on the other side of the aisle want to stop Laura Hunt of Modesto, who lost her husband's employer-based coverage when he was killed in a car crash? Why do they want to stop her from getting affordable health care? Kevin Burke, an assembly worker, he told the Fresno Bee he'd been out of work for 2 years. Now he qualifies for Medicaid. And he's going to be okay. And he's not going to wait till he's rushed to an emergency room. Why do my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to stop Kevin Burke of Fresno from getting affordable health insurance? They need to look into their hearts. Then there's Rufino Arango, a diabetic. At Vista Health Center, he filled out an application for coverage through a significant expansion of Medi-Cal. Rufina and her family lost their health insurance several years ago when her husband was laid off after working for 22 years. She said, it's so great, it's going to help so many of us. If not for Obamacare, many of us would not qualify for health insurance. I could go on and on with these stories. I don't have the time to do it, but I'm going to keep on adding these stories to the congressional record. So someday, when people look back at this moment in history and they realize that we stood up for the people and their right to have affordable health care, that we did it for a very good reason. And someday in the future, people say, you mean there was a time when we had 40 million people without insurance? Are you kidding? But that's the moment we're in now. We're either going to stand sentry, as my friend Barbara Mikulski always says, for a law that's going to help people, or we're going to just walk away. And let me say, no law is perfect. Of course there are glitches. Of course there are issues. We're very happy to talk about making it better, very happy. The President is as well. He said as much. And I just want everyone, Madam President, to read an opinion piece that ran in the Washington Post recently, a couple of days ago, by one of my constituents. Her name is Janine Urbaniak. Janine Urbaniak Reed. She's a writer, and so she has a beautiful way of expressing herself. And she talks about her loving son, Mason, who has brain cancer. and who has had to undergo multiple surgeries. Listen to this. He would have hit his lifetime limit on the policy, and the family would have been driven into, her words, the financial abyss if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act. She writes that the family, and I quote, "thanks God and whoever else would listen for our good fortune to have coverage." And she ends her piece with this line: "If I could get those who are trying to repeal this law on a conference call, I would explain this to them. I would tell them that while they were busy trying to derail the Affordable Care Act over the past 2 years, Mason has again learned to walk, talk, eat, and shoot a three-point basket." End of quote. Why would anyone want to hurt that family and reverse our law, the Affordable Care Act? It's everybody's law that says no more lifetime limits and no more annual limits, Madam President. I mean, you have to ask the Republicans why they want to do it. They come to the floor and they say, health care costs are rising, these things, the sky is falling, but then you look at the facts. And the facts are tens of thousands of people are signing up. Millions of people, young people, are now able to stay on their parents' policies till they're about 26. No more pre-existing condition bar. If you have a pre-existing condition, you still can get insurance. There are so many good things. Women are no longer discriminated against. We used to pay twice as much as men. Being a woman was considered a pre-existing condition. Can you imagine? Really. Because, yes, we could have babies, and yes, we had certain needs. Well, that's over now. We have equal rights in this Affordable Care Act. So I have to just say, the reason for the shutting down of the government was to stop the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act is now signing up tens of thousands of people. It's saving a lot of our families. And if the Republicans want to make improvements in it, that's fine. We're ready to do it. We'll sit down with anyone and make this law better. Absolutely. But don't stop a law that passed almost 4 years ago, that was upheld by the Supreme Court, and, may I say, there was a big election about it. Remember what Mitt Romney said: the first thing I'll do when I am your president is to repeal Obamacare. That is my promise. And boy, I believed him. It was a big issue. And people decided, you know, that wasn't a good enough reason. And they re-elected our president, not in a small way, but in a big way. So since there's no more reason to shut down the government because the Affordable Care Act can't be stopped, it's funded by a separate stream of funding, not yearly appropriations, we beg the Republicans, don't shut the government down over this. It's starting, it's happening, and we're not going to repeal a law that took, well, I'd say decades to pass. So they didn't listen, and now they stopped talking about the Affordable Care Act pretty much. Now they have a whole different reason for shutting down the government and bringing us to the brink of default. And that reason is deficits. Deficits. I want to talk a little bit about default, because we're hours away from a default. The first time in this nation's great history. If we don't take action, we'll be unable to pay the bills that have been incurred in the past. It's important to note, we've gone through so many crises in our nation, tough ones. Civil strife, world wars, the Great Depression. We always followed the Constitution that says, and I quote, "The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned," unquote. That's in the Constitution. And yet, from the people who say they're constitutionalists, they seem not to read that part. And they are flirting for the first time with allowing us to get to the point where we can't pay all our bills. And that is a default. And I want to just say this. Some of our colleagues come to the floor and they say, well, it's not a default if you pay interest on the bonds. Now, I'm an old economics major, but I don't pretend to know everything about economics. But I can tell you this, the definition of a default in Black's Law Dictionary is the failure to make a payment when due. It doesn't say the failure to make an interest payment when due, the failure to make a payment. That means to our contractors. That means to our workers. That means to our Social Security recipients. That means to our Medicare recipients. I got to say, I've never seen such creative license taken when it comes to the default. A party that says it's fiscally conservative says it's not a default when you don't pay your bills as long as you pay China the interest we owe them. You've got to be kidding. Take that to a town hall, I say to my friend who represents so many wonderful seniors in the great state of Florida, my friend Senator Nelson, who's on the floor. So we have never gotten to this point. Never gotten to this point. Yes, I would be delighted.
Madam President, if the senator would yield on that point.
Yes, I can yield for as much time as you wish.
Since the senator so eloquently has posed this question, since this senator has the privilege of being the chairman of the Aging Committee, and since the senator from California has just pointed out that seniors are at risk, I want to remind the Senate that on October the 23rd, there is a due bill to be paid of $12 billion to Social Security recipients. October the 23rd. Shortly thereafter, on November the 1st, there is another bill due, $67 billion for Social Security recipients, for Medicare recipients, and for SSI, which is for Social Security for low-income seniors. In addition to the default that the senator from California has talked about, defaulting on interest payments on U.S. Treasury bills, we're talking about default to real people with real needs, and this is just a drop in the bucket of the total amount that's coming due. I thank the senator for letting me share that in this discussion, and I might say that the presiding officer, the junior senator from Massachusetts, or now the senior senator, senior senator from Massachusetts, is one of the most active and prominent members of the Aging Committee, which has pointed out statistics like this over and over again.
Well, I just want to say to my friend, thank you. I hope we can have these conversations. I say to the chair, thank you so much for recognizing my friend so he could make his point. We are, as Leader Pelosi said, we're playing with fire. We're playing with lives. One of our colleagues, Senator Casey from Pennsylvania, read the most amazing letter he got from a constituent who said she's so worried about her parents, they're in their 80s, and the fear, just the thought of maybe not getting a check on time, that's making her parents physically ill. Why are we doing this? There's no reason to do this. This is a self-inflicted wound. The government shutdown, self-inflicted. Playing with the full faith and credit of the United States of America, self-inflicted wound. And here's the thing. We know one of the heroes of the Republican Party and a hero to many Democrats is Ronald Reagan. And let's see what he said. I have it here. When it comes to the debt, I have it. The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default, are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and on the value of the dollar in exchange markets. The nation can ill afford to allow such a result. That is Ronald Reagan. I was here during most of his presidency. I was over in the House. I think my friend was too. And Lord knows, we didn't agree with Ronald Reagan on everything. We agreed with him on some things, not all things. And we may have cast a vote or two to say we object, but no one ever brought down the full faith and credit of the United States. He got 18 increases in the debt ceiling during his presidency. 18 over 8 years. So, you know, there are two paths that we can take. One path is a road that's a little bit bumpy and curvy and dusty, but at the end of the day, it gets us where we want to go, into a budget conference with our bills paid and our government open to the people, and that's the bipartisan road. It's not easy. And I'm so proud of Senators Reid and McConnell for working on a plan that is something we can accept. No one on either side is thrilled about it, but we can accept it. It gets us out of this mess. That's the road we should take, the bipartisan road that gets us into the conference, that opens up the doors of government and pays our bills. The other road is the road that the House Republicans are taking. That road is straight over the cliff. That's the partisan road. And we'll dive down. We're not going to get there that way. We're going to bring a world of hurt on the people. What did the people do to deserve this? They didn't vote the way my Republican friends in the House wanted them to. Sorry, that's what elections are about. I've been disappointed in election outcomes, believe me, more times than I care to admit. That's what elections are about. Well, once you get here, you have to work across party lines. And even though that road is bumpy and dusty and twisty and windy and all the rest of it, that's the road that gets us where we have to go. That's the road that leaders Reid and McConnell had us on until a few hours ago, when all of a sudden that road kind of shut down and the other road, that partisan road, just opened right up. I don't know why they're taking us down that road, leading us off a cliff with all the pain and suffering and job loss and economic chaos that awaits if we go down that road. But I honestly think we can get back on that bipartisan path. I don't know exactly how it will come about. How a bill becomes a law is sometimes very complicated, but if the House sends us something, but we can work to make it bipartisan, we'll be over this. We'll be over this. We can't have a strictly partisan political bill. I want to share with you, Madam President, with my colleague, the fact that Fitch, a credit rating service, has put our creditworthiness, quote, under review for a downgrade, according to the Associated Press. It means that America's AAA rating is in doubt. Let me say that again. Fitch, a credit rating service, put our creditworthiness, quote, under review for a downgrade, unquote, reports the Associated Press, putting America's AAA rating in doubt. Just this afternoon, after the bipartisan plan was stalled here in the Senate and the House went forward with their partisan plan. What Fitch did is a warning sign. It's a warning sign for businesses in terms of their borrowing costs to expand. It's a warning sign to the job market if there's a lack of expansion by the business community. It's a warning sign that students could be paying higher interest rates to go to college. It's a warning sign for homeowners who could be paying higher rates for their mortgages. What is going on? We're just getting out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. Madam President, you're in the Senate because you fought so hard to get this economy on track, and people in your state said that's just what we need. And you came here. And now this self-inflicted wound, just as we're coming out of it, just as we're starting to see progress, why are we doing this? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the bill that the House is probably going to be voting on soon, because it deals with a couple of things that are very problematical. I've already said it's a partisan bill. Speaker Boehner didn't have a conversation with Leader Pelosi. He just wrote the bill with Republicans only, as opposed to Harry Reid, who wrote our compromise with the Republicans, taking us down that bipartisan road. So my understanding is that the House bill does something that is inexplicable to me and many others, both Republicans and Democrats. Listen to this, Madam President. It says that no president, starting now with this president, and into the future, no president can take steps to avoid a default. I don't get it. We all know a default is chaos. Everyone agrees it's terrible, it's bad. And Republican and Democratic administrations for decades have taken measures when there's a little stall here or there and they need a few days to move around a bill or two. I can't believe it. From a party that said, in case we default, we should prioritize who we pay, they will not allow future administrations to avoid a default and add a couple of days until we face that. So listen to what Tony Fratto said. He worked in the Bush administration as Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs for Treasury. He said the following, Madam President, and I quote, "Restricting Treasury's use of extraordinary measures is like restricting the fire department's use of hoses." So imagine if you said to a fire department, you can use every tool at your disposal, but you can't use a water hose to put out a fire. They are saying to the Treasury Department, you have to default even if there's an easy way to avoid it for a few days. What are they thinking? Do they want this administration and others to have an easier path to default? I thought we'd all agree we certainly don't ever want to default, but certainly give the ability of an administration, Democratic or Republican, to avert a default if they can. Their language makes no sense. And then their other rider they have on there is my understanding. I could be wrong, but this is what I get from reading what their legislation I think is going to be. The other one involves treating congressional employees differently than any other employee in the country who works for a large employer by taking away the employer contribution that these workers have had for more than 50 years. Now, I don't get it. Why do Republicans want to punish the people who work so hard for them and work so hard for our country? What are they thinking? Why do they want to treat people differently than all other workers who work for large employers? Honest to God, I don't get it. I don't get it. If they don't like the people who work for them, then get somebody else. But don't punish your staff who works day and night, and I want to say my staff and yours who are working without a paycheck. Well, this is a lovely thing to say to these workers, some of whom earn very little. You are going to be the only people in the country now who cannot get an employer contribution. I don't get it. I really don't. So here we are, a government shutdown because the Republicans won't accept the fact that a law passed 4 years ago that they don't like, that the Supreme Court upheld, and they didn't like that. There was election over it, and they didn't like that, so they stamped their feet and said, we're shutting down the government. And is there ever pain? I've got communities in Los Angeles, one particular one, where kids are getting nosebleeds, they're sick, they live near an industrial site, and the Environmental Protection Agency was about to find out what the problem was when they shut down. And those kids don't have an answer. I had a plane crash in a small airport in Santa Monica, killed 4 people. We don't know why it happened, but there's no investigation. It had to stop midstream. I don't have any inspectors on the ground inspecting clean air, clean water, safe drinking water. There are 505 Superfund sites where cleanup has been suspended. Madam President, I know you have some in your state. These sites are toxic brews. They have arsenic, they have benzene, they have chlorine, they have everything in them that's bad for people to breathe. It's bad if it gets in the drinking water. No inspectors on the ground and no cleanup at 505 Superfund sites. Remember Fukushima? I think everyone knows what Fukushima is. Well, now 92% of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff have been furloughed. They have one mission, and I'm quoting from their mission, to, quote, ensure the safe use of radioactive materials, unquote. The Army Corps manages 12 million acres of public lands. They host 370 million visitors annually. This is just the time of year when people still, just before we get to winter, can go out there and enjoy the recreation. No, they're closed. And just think about the mom and pop shops that exist around our parks, our Army Corps land, our wildlife refuges. 561, they're all closed because of the shutdown. And hunting season is in full swing. I already talked about the fact that the National Transportation Safety Board furloughed 380 of its 400 employees, and they've suspended all their pending investigations, and I talked about that. There's another crash they were investigating in San Francisco, the Asiana Airlines Flight 214. And I'll tell you, when you stop an investigation like that, it's hard to get right back to it, and the problem is it takes you longer to find the cause of the crash. And a lot of times, these crashes have clues in them that there may be a part in a certain type of plane that's defective, there may be a problem on the runway, something wrong. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, another watchdog. In San Diego last week, a 2-year-old child, Annette Estrada, was killed. She was crushed by a falling TV. So they can't investigate this incident, and maybe some other kids are going to suffer that. It might have been a very defective design. What does the House do? They're governing by press release. They keep or we'll open this little sliver of an agency and that one. That's not how you run the greatest nation on earth. Open up the government. You said you shut it down because of Obamacare. Obamacare is going forward. You want to fix some parts of it. We're ready to talk. There's no winners in this shutdown. It's devastating for our workers. Do you know there are more contract employees than there are federal employees, Madam President? There are. And even if you take away the military federal contractor employees, and we'll hope that they're getting paid, we're not positive they all are, but let's say they are, there's more than 2 million contract employees that don't know where the next paycheck are coming. We sent a bill over to Speaker Boehner in the House. Open up the government. Just open it up. And then we'll negotiate all the issues you want to talk about. He would not even allow a vote on that. So we're in a bad place. And I have to say, you know, I've lived long enough to know that life does deal us some terrible blows. We know that, each of us. We've each had our tragedies, our challenges, whether they're health challenges or financial challenges or all kinds of challenges. We have enough of those without a self-inflicted wound. 2, a government shutdown over here and a pending default over here, totally unnecessary, could end in 5 minutes, but still the angst continues. Still the anxiety continues. Still the uncertainty continues. And I'll close with a hopeful note. I laid out the 2 paths we have, the partisan path to a cliff or the windy, difficult, bipartisan path, which the Senate was on until we were pulled off it. And I hope and pray that we will get back on that bipartisan path, that we will reopen this government, that we will pay our bills, and this great nation can get back to doing what we do best, making sure that this American dream is there for everybody, making sure that we care about our people, making sure that they have access to their government, and just getting us out of this morass that we are in for no good reason. We can do it. The path is there, Madam President. Let's hope we take that path. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor. And I do note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
We heard Senator Boxer talking about the latest House GOP proposal to reopen the government and extend the debt ceiling. The House Rules Committee was scheduled to meet to consider that proposal, but the meeting has been postponed. Politico writes that President Obama told House Democratic leaders today that he would veto debt ceiling legislation if it includes a provision pushed by Senator Vitter and House GOP leaders that would cut health subsidies for congressional and senior executive branch officials. The version of the provision included in the bill the House was slated to consider tonight would eliminate employer contributions for lawmakers and Hill staffers' health insurance purchases. And Jennifer Haberkorn with Politico tweets, the Vitter plan would cost lawmakers at least $5,000 per year in new health costs. Here are Senator Vitter and Majority Whip Dick Durbin talking about the measure.
Hours ago, I was here on the Senate floor urging and encouraging the House to act on a compromise proposal to deal with the current fiscal issues before us that included the no Washington exemption from Obamacare language. As I said, I think that's very, very important for 2 reasons. One, the principle. I think the first rule of American democracy should be that Washington lives by the same rules as it imposes on America under Obamacare, under everything. And secondly, a very practical consideration. I think the quicker we do that, the quicker we start getting things right, the quicker we start understanding in a gut personal way the real challenges and burdens of Obamacare, and the quicker we start changing that. I returned just a couple hours later to congratulate the House because apparently they're moving in exactly that direction. And all indications are that they'll be going to the Rules Committee very, very soon with a package that features, that really has as its centerpiece, that no Washington exemptions from Obamacare language. Again, I think it's important for all the reasons I said. I also want to point out that assuming the House passes that, I think they're going to tonight, that no Washington exemptions language will be the only thing, the only substantial thing in that proposal that hasn't been essentially agreed to by Senate Democrats. Everything else are details, a date here, minor provisions. The only major difference between what the House is hopefully passing tonight and what's been agreed to in discussions by Senate Democrats is that no Washington exemption language. So the question will be, is this perceived crisis, is this standoff really going to continue over that, over members protecting their wallets, their special elite status, demanding that they're treated differently than other Americans under Obamacare? Is it really going to continue and not be resolved over that? I think that's what it will all be about, again, assuming, as I hope it does, the House passes this proposal tonight. Again, Mr. President, the Obamacare language, the statute itself does not allow for this special exemption or special subsidy. That is nowhere in the statute. And because of that, it was sort of an example of what Nancy Pelosi said about the Obamacare statute in general. We have to pass it to figure out what's in it. Well, it passed with language in it that said clearly members of Congress and their staff would have to go to the Obamacare exchanges for their health care, no provision for any special subsidy. And then after it passed, many folks on Capitol Hill read it to figure out what was in it. When they got to that section, they said, oh, you know what, we can't live under this. We can't stand for this. So then a fierce lobbying campaign started to get the administration to fix Obamacare, but not to fix it for America, to fix it for Congress. And that resulted in a special Obama administration rule that was conveniently issued right as Congress was leaving Washington for the August recess, right as Congress was fleeing the scene of the crime. That rule really did two things, neither of which is in the statute. And that's why it's a completely illegal rule contrary to the statute, in my opinion. First of all, the rule said when the statute says that members of Congress and their staff have to go to the exchanges for their health care, well, we don't know who official staff is. We can't figure that out, the administrative agency said. So we're going to leave that up to each individual member of Congress. Now, that's absurd. The language is clear. All official staff are covered. The administration should have demanded on the rule that all official staff are covered and not leave it up to individual members. But under this cozy relationship, an individual member can exempt any staffer that he or she likes. In fact, in theory, that member can exempt all of his staff and say, it's up to me, they are not official staff for purposes of this provision of Obamacare. That's absurd on its face. And then the second thing this special rule for Congress only did is say, well, for those who go to the exchanges, including members, they get to take a huge taxpayer-funded subsidy with them, a subsidy available to no other American at that income level, no other American. That's not in the Obamacare statute, and that is made up out of thin air in terms of this rule. So we need to correct that situation, and we need to make sure that Washington is treated like America. First, because it's the right thing to do. It should be the first guiding principle of American democracy. Second, for the practical reason I stated. The quicker we do that on Obamacare and across the board, the quicker Washington, Congress, the President will start getting important matters, including impact of Obamacare, right.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I will in just a moment. Again, I congratulate the House for doing exactly that, And again, I would point out, assuming the House does that and passes that tonight, the only significant difference between their package and what Senate Democrats have agreed to in discussions here will be this no Washington exemption language from Obamacare. There'll be other very minor differences, a date here, language regarding how income verification is handled, very, very minor compared to this central issue. So that's what it's coming down to, and that will be what Senate action on that House proposal is about. I'll be happy to yield to my distinguished colleague from Illinois.
Since the senator from Louisiana, I'd say through the chair, has raised on the floor many times the issue of the health insurance of members of Congress, I will volunteer that I'm under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. Some 8 million federal employees, including members of Congress and their staff, are currently under the same health insurance program across the nation. I have the same health insurance policy as the park ranger at the Lincoln home in Springfield, Illinois. I would ask the senator from Louisiana, what is your health insurance policy?
I'm under exactly the same program, and what I'm suggesting is merely that we follow the law. The distinguished senator and many of his Democratic colleagues constantly make the point that Obamacare is the law of the land. He's right. I want to change that largely. You don't. It is the law of the land as we speak.
Senator, will you yield?
And that, let me finish, and that law of the land is crystal clear. It has a specific provision about this, and it says every member of Congress and all of their official staff can no longer stay in that plan, have to go to the Obamacare exchanges, the so-called fallback provision for the American people. And I think there was a reason for that. I think there was thinking behind that, and it's simple, that we should live under that same scenario that millions of Americans have to live under, 8 million plus, who don't want to have to go to the exchanges, who like the insurance plan they have now, who heard the President say, if you like the plan you have now, you can keep it, and who found out after the fact that that just wasn't true for them. 8 million plus who are being forced off coverage they like to go to the Obamacare exchanges.
Senator,
they don't get
further question.
They don't get any subsidy. They don't get this special treatment, and I'm suggesting we should not as well.
The senator will yield for further question through the chair.
Yes.
The senator, I hope, will concede that members of Congress and their staff are going into the insurance exchanges because of an express provision requiring that to happen in the law offered by Republican Senators Coburn and Grassley. Secondly, what we're dealing with here is a strange situation. Obamacare doesn't force anybody into the insurance exchange. It is available for those who have no health insurance or those who are on individual health insurance plans and want to buy something different. So
if I can respond and reclaim my time, I don't think that's true at all. I think Obamacare absolutely forces millions of other Americans into the exchange.
If I could.
Now, I've reclaimed my time. Now, it's not the same mechanism that it is for members of Congress. It's not an express provision, but it's forcing 8 million plus Americans into the exchanges against their will nonetheless. Because there are many, many Americans who want to keep the coverage they have. They heard over and over from President Obama, if you like the coverage you have, you can keep it. And then they found out that for them, that was a lie. They did like the coverage they have. They are losing it against their will. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that's by design, because the Obamacare statute creates clear incentives for many, many employers to get out of the health insurance provision business and to just let their workers go to the exchanges. And so I completely disagree with the statement from the senator from Illinois when he said no other American was forced on to the exchanges. Millions of other Americans were forced on to the exchanges in a different way, but absolutely millions of Americans were forced onto the exchanges against their will.
If Senator yield further for a question through the chair, since the senator is under the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, his monthly premiums for his health insurance and my health insurance receive an employer contribution. That's how most Americans who work get their health insurance. The employer contribution he receives and I receive about 72% of the premium. The senator from Louisiana has characterized an employer contribution as a government subsidy. I would like to ask the senator from Louisiana, is he prepared to disclose the government subsidy, as he calls it, that he has personally received for his health insurance as a member of the United States Senate?
Absolutely. That's all reclaiming my time and reclaiming the floor. That is absolutely public information. That is true. What I'm merely suggesting is that Obamacare mandates a change, and that is the law of the land, as you and your Democratic colleagues make the point many, many times, and we should live by the law of the land. And as the distinguished senator from Illinois absolutely knows, there is no provision in the Obamacare statute for that subsidy to transfer to the exchanges for members or congressional staff. No provision whatsoever. And in fact, having that happen is inconsistent with the law because the requirements of exchange policies are different than the requirements for FEHBP policies, so it is completely inconsistent with the law for that subsidy to follow members of Congress to the exchanges. It's nowhere mentioned in the statute.
Would the senator
it's made up out of thin air under this illegal Obama administration rule with no sufficient statutory basis in the law.
Senator yield for a question?
Yes.
If the senator is stating that no one under an insurance exchange, no one can receive an employer contribution for their health insurance, he is wrong.
Reclaiming my time and reclaiming the floor, I did not state that, and I will not state that. What I did state is that there is no subsidy available to members of Congress and congressional staff under the Obamacare statute. There is no provision in the statute for that old FEHBP subsidy to magically redo itself as an exchange subsidy. There is absolutely no provision of that whatsoever. And folks, these 8 million Americans who were forced out of the plans they liked, they're not getting a subsidy. They're going to the individual exchange, and they're getting no comparable subsidy.
Senator,
now, if they're low enough income, they get a subsidy for being at a certain income level.
Senator from Louisiana's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
And I would urge again that the Senate stand tall, stand with the American people, not stand for Washington elites. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I'm glad to have that exchange with my colleague. Because you see, he comes to the floor repeatedly and says things which aren't altogether accurate. That's why I wanted to speak to him today. And he yielded for a question, and I thank him. I'm sorry he's left, because I'd like to further engage him in dialogue. There's a reason why he left. There are questions he can't answer. And if he tries to answer them, his whole case explodes in front of him. We created these insurance exchange for 40 or 50 million Americans who have no health insurance or had rotten health insurance. They were paying a fortune for bad health insurance policies. When he says 8 million people were forced in the exchanges, here's what he's really saying. 8 million people had health insurance policies that were so bad that those policies, frankly, had to be rewritten. Here's what we said is the law now under the Obamacare. You offer a health insurance policy to my family or the senator from Connecticut's family, you cannot discriminate against a person applying for health insurance because of pre-existing conditions for anybody in your family. Anybody have anybody in their family with pre-existing conditions? We all do. And we decided that was fundamentally unfair. If you have a child with asthma, a wife with diabetes, mental illness in your family, for goodness sakes, you shouldn't be discriminated against. That's one of the provisions of Obamacare, which many on the other side of the aisle want to repeal. Secondly, we said, we can have no lifetime limits on your health insurance policy. What does that mean? In the old days, you'd buy a policy that says, we'll give you great coverage up to $100,000, then you're on your own. $100,000, that ought to be just great. Until you end up in the doctor's office the next day, or someone in your family, with a serious cancer diagnosis, with surgery, chemo, radiation, going on for a long period of time that goes way over $100,000, and it can happen. I had a routine surgery 3 years ago, routine, and it turned out just fine. It cost over $100,000. If I had one of those limited policies, I would have had to start paying out of my pocket. So we eliminated that and said you can't have a cap on insurance policies. They want to repeal that. They want caps on insurance policies. Turned out that 60% of the family insurance policies in America did not cover maternity benefits. How about that? How about that? Love families and love children? Well, how about making sure health insurance covers them? That's in Obamacare, and they want to repeal it. The list goes on. Here's the point I want to get to. Members of Congress are now going to be covered by the same insurance policies offered by Obamacare, and our staff will too. That's acceptable to me. I've taken a look at what's available. It's as good as anything members of Congress receive today. I'm not worried about the quality of coverage for myself and my wife. It'll be just fine. I can live with that. But currently, the senator from Louisiana, this senator, and every other senator, when it comes to health insurance, has the same health insurance as federal employees. 8 million federal employees and their families. Same basic coverage. I think it's pretty darn good. I've said that on the floor. People have corrected me saying, Senator, you may have a policy worth, I don't know, $15,000 a year. There are people who have policies worth $40,000 a year. So I'll just leave it at this. I think I have good coverage for myself and my wife. I can match that coverage in terms of the quality of coverage on the insurance exchanges without fear of interruption in service and protection for me and my wife. So I feel good about that. Here's what the senator from Louisiana is upset about. When I go on the insurance exchange, which is required by law, not voluntary, required by law, he doesn't want the employer to make any contributions for my health insurance for my family. And he says our staff should be under the same restriction. Well, people who get their health insurance through their employer across America, virtually all of them have employer contributions. This is common. There's nothing sinister or sneaky about it. And so now he calls it a government subsidy, the employer contribution. All I ask is this. I'll go on the insurance exchange, happily do so. Treat me the same way when it comes to employer contribution for my health insurance and my staff health insurance as every other federal employee. Just that simple. He says no. That's special treatment for members of Congress. Well, the senator from Louisiana is just plain wrong. And he stands here on the floor and talks about special privileges for members of Congress. Let me tell you what I'm prepared to do. I'm prepared to put a specific provision in the law which says no member of Congress or member of any congressional staff shall receive any special privileges or additional rights not available to every other person under the SHOP or insurance exchange program. How's that? I could live with that because, as he almost acknowledged, currently employer contributions can be made for those who are on the insurance exchanges. It's there. We're not getting anything too unusual. It's already there. And so this argument about some special treatment for members of Congress, no way. And I'll tell you what bothers me the most about this, Senator, Mr. President, Senator from Connecticut. What bothers me the most about this, it doesn't take an act of political courage to take money away from somebody else. In this case, away from our staff people. You know, I started out here as an intern a long, long time ago when I was in college, and I worked around the Hill all my life. There are some extraordinary people here. People go to work every darn day to make me look good, to answer the phone, try to satisfy the needs of the people of Illinois, to deal with some pretty serious cases that involve life and death sometimes, or federal benefits. They work long hours, they do great work, and because of their great work, they cover me in glory with regularity. I can't thank them enough. What a thanks this is, to say to them, we're going to eliminate your employer's contribution for your health insurance. You're on your own. That's what the senator from Louisiana wants to do. If he thinks employer's contribution for health insurance is something that is sinister, shouldn't be allowed for members of Congress and their staff, hang on tight, because we have 150 million people in America who have health insurance through their work with an employer contribution. Is that his next target? Is he going after them? Well, he's in for a fight because people can't afford health insurance without employers helping to pay. We put it in the tax code. We've got to protect it in the tax code. We've got to beat the Vitter Amendment. Think about this for a second. We started this debate 2 weeks ago. A senator from Texas took the floor for 21 hours, stayed up all night. His goal, let's defund Obamacare. What happened? His side ended up shutting down the government and putting us now within 36 hours of defaulting on our national debt for the first time in history over the issue of defunding Obamacare. Haven't heard that recently, have you? They stopped talking about it because something's happened. Over 12 million people are now going on the internet trying to find whether they can get eligible for an insurance policy, health insurance policy. The popularity of Obamacare has gone up as the Republicans have criticized it because there are an awful lot of people out there who don't have health insurance, or they have health insurance they can't afford. I'm not going to make excuses for the problems with the computers and the internet as a program kicks off. It better improve, and it will. But it shows you when you're overwhelmed with people who want health insurance, what happens? The system broke down. Well, we've got to get better. But during this period of time when the other side was railing against Obamacare, the numbers of approval for Obamacare were going up across America. It didn't work. They gave up on defunding Obamacare. I haven't heard that phrase in a long time. 2 weeks ago, the senator from Texas, but not since. And so now they've decided that instead of defunding Obamacare, they're going to follow the senator from Louisiana who wants to take the health insurance away or make it prohibitively expensive for members of Congress and their staff. That's it. That's what this has been all about. We have shut down the government, and we have run the risk of defaulting on our debts for the first time in history over whether or not our employees, the people on our staff, are going to get a federal government contribution for paying their health insurance. That's pathetic. That is pathetic that we've reached that point. I believe health insurance is a right. It isn't a privilege. And I believe employer-sponsored health insurance is a good thing that we ought to protect. And I believe members of Congress ought to play by the same rules as everybody else in the insurance exchanges, and our staff should as well. And if he accepts those as premises, his amendment goes away, disappears. But if he's out to get the employer contribution on health insurance, maybe that's his goal, have at it. I think he's going to find it's a very lonely battle. Most Americans, Democrats and Republicans, value health insurance, need to have it at times in their lives to give them peace of mind they're getting the best care. And this war on health insurance for individuals, the uninsured, even members of Congress and their employees is mindless. It is mindless and petty. We've got to do better. We need to expand the reach of health insurance across America. We're going to. In this effort to defund Obamacare and now this Vitter Amendment, we have to defeat both of those efforts. Once this program is in place and Americans have this protection, you're never going to take it away. Once you have that peace of mind with affordable health insurance, and 6 out of 10 of the people who go into the insurance exchanges will pay less than $100 a month for health insurance, less than a cable bill. Finally, they get health insurance. That's what it's all about. Once it happens, once it moves forward, it'll become one of the basic things in America that we count on to protect ourselves and our families. We've got to defeat this Vitter Amendment. It is just pathetic that we've reached this point with the shutdown of the government and the idea of defaulting on the debt that it's come down to this amendment. It really is sad. It doesn't speak well for those on the other side who started off with this lofty goal to defund Obamacare. And in the end, all they want to do is to raise the cost of health insurance for the people who are working night and day for them in their offices across America. I hope the people of this country understand what this debate has finally descended to and will join us in defeating this Vitter Amendment.
Senators Vitter and Durbin were talking about a measure in the latest House Republican proposal to end the government shutdown and raise the borrowing limit that would make lawmakers and their staffs ineligible to receive employer health care contributions from the government. Reportedly, the president has said he'd veto any proposal that includes that provision. Another measure in the GOP proposal, the latest one, would not allow the Treasury Department to take measures to avoid a default. Congressional Quarterly writes that yet another House GOP plan has gone kaput. Conservatives didn't like Republican leadership's initial continuing resolution and debt limit proposal, so leadership amended it. But even after the changes were made, conservatives once again derailed the bill. And the story goes on to say that the House Rules Committee postponed its 5:40 meeting on that debt limit and CR proposal. And Rules Committee Chairman Sessions said his panel would meet in a few hours, potentially giving leaders a little more time to whip up the vote. Here now from the Senate side, Senator Reid talking about proposals from House Republicans.
Mr. President, the House Republican leadership's plan that is now out and people have taken a look at it, it's a plan to advance an extreme piece of legislation, and it's nothing more than a blatant attack on bipartisanship. In the past several days, we've been engaged in productive bipartisan negotiations in the Senate. Everyone knows that. We've been working across party lines and making steady progress to achieve an agreement that reopens the government, protects the full faith and credit of our great country, and opens talks to put this country on a firm fiscal footing. Everyone needs to know that the measure under discussion in the House is no part of what we've negotiated here in the Senate. Mr. President, the debt is here. The deadline is looming. Rating agencies are talking about downgrading us as early as tonight. Again. I know I speak for many of us who've been working in good faith when I say that we felt blindsided by the news from the House. But this isn't the first time. Extremist Republicans in the House of Representatives are attempting to torpedo the Senate's bipartisan progress with a bill that can't pass the Senate, can't pass the Senate, and won't pass the Senate. The House measure would take away the President's fundamental authority. It's been in existence for as long as political science can remember. It's been in place for decade after decade after decade to prevent a catastrophic default on the nation's bills. Out of spite, Tea Party Republicans are trying to take authority away from President Obama. They would never, ever consider doing this if it were President Romney, President Bush, or President Bush, or President Reagan. Never. But as they've said, and they've cheered over there, the government's closed. We don't mind defaulting on the debt. It's good for the country. That's what they've said. Their legislation would also make unacceptable major changes to Obamacare. House legislation doesn't even include a process for bipartisan negotiations on a sensible long-term budget. They just throw out these numbers and think magic's going to happen, and somehow, comes January 15th, everything will be hunky-dory. There are still processes we have to follow. They set no pattern, no schedule, no routine to do that. For weeks, Republicans have claimed they want to negotiate, but their legislation completely ignores the need to work together to craft a budget and put our country on a fiscally sustainable path. For years, Mr. President, they've complained about, why don't we have a regular order here? They complained about a lack of a budget. Now they don't want us even to negotiate a budget. Hard to comprehend this logically. But, Mr. President, the Tea Party-driven part of the Republican Party doesn't follow logic. Or why would they want to close the government for 15 days, have us default on our debt? Introduction of this measure by House Republican leadership is unproductive and a waste of time. Let's be clear. The House legislation will not pass the Senate. And here is what the White House said just a few minutes ago. Quote, "The President has said repeatedly that members of Congress don't get to demand ransom for fulfilling their basic responsibilities to pass a budget and pay the nation's bills. Unfortunately, the latest proposal from the House Republicans does just that in a partisan attempt to appease a small group of Tea Party Republicans who forced the government to shut down in the first place." I'm very disappointed with John Boehner, who would once again try to preserve his role at the expense of the country. I've worked hard to rise above partisanship and find common ground in the Senate. And, Mr. President, we've done that together for the good of the nation. This is much bigger than the senator who's presiding from the state of Hawaii, or the assistant leader who's to my side. This is much bigger than that. It's much bigger than me. It's much bigger than two senators who are here from Connecticut. We have the senator who's chairman of the Budget Committee, Senator Murray. It's bigger than her. It's bigger than the senior senator from New York, Senator Schumer, who's on this floor. Mr. President, we have to start working together for our country. That's what we've been trying to do. This is so disappointing. On the eve of financial destruction for this great country, and that's what it is, to appease a small group of people over there. I'm so disappointed.
Senator Neal for a question.
I would be happy to.
I'd like to ask the Senator, Majority Leader, through the chair, one of the key elements in this new proposal from Speaker Boehner is to diminish this President's authority to deal with a default on our national debt. This authority, so-called extraordinary measures or emergency measures, gives to presidents, going back to President Kennedy, the wherewithal through the Treasury Department to try to avoid an economic disaster which could impact families, businesses, jobs, and the reputation of the United States in the world. I ask, through the chair, of the Majority Leader, now that we have seen the Republican Party bring us so close to the precipice on a default, it is unimaginable to me that any president, including President Obama, would surrender this authority to keep America safe in light of this type of threat. Is this one of the key elements in terms of the problems associated with the Boehner proposal?
Mr. President, to my friend from Illinois, senior senator, we've seen what's gone on these last few months, this whole year, with a group of people who are out giving press conferences, holding demonstrations. They want the government to stay closed. They wanted it to close in the first place. The hardship that we have all over this country is really, really awful. And then, if that's not good enough, they're out boasting that they want the country to fail its obligations to pay its bills. These are not new programs. These are obligations we have. And then, I mean, that's one of the things. The proposal they have would not allow, for example, my friend is the chair of the most, some say the most important part of the whole federal government to protect the safety and security of the United States. Subcommittee dealing with defense that was led by many, many decades by the late Senator Dan Inouye. This proposal they've sent gives the President of the United States, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, no flexibility whatever when sequestration kicks in on the 15th. We're not asking them to change those numbers. We agree to those numbers. We've voted here to approve those numbers. But they won't even allow flexibility to allow the Department of Defense to shift that money around. I do not know how the defense of this country can go forward if they don't have flexibility with losing $22 billion beginning January 15th. They don't even give authority for that. This bill that they're sending over here is doomed to failure. It's doomed to failure legislatively, and it is so awful, awful, awful for our country.
A headline in the Washington Post, House plan to reopen government falters. After the Republican-controlled House scheduled a vote Tuesday night on a plan to reopen the federal government and raise the debt ceiling, support from conservatives for the deal crumbled, leaving Washington without a clear path forward for avoiding a first-ever default on the nation's debt. And the story goes on to say, it was already far from clear if the Republican proposal could attract enough support in the democratically controlled Senate to end Washington's political crisis. The plan contains several provisions the Democrats have strongly opposed. A couple tweets. Luke Russert of NBC News, Representatives Camp and Goodlatte, now in Boehner's office. I presume tax reform and immigration aren't being discussed. And another one from Rebecca Shabbat with The Hill. We the pizza? ? Staffers just brought pizza into Boehner's office via lower entrance. Going to be a long night. Here's Senator McCain now talking about Senator Reid's reaction to the House plan to reopen the government.
In the last 24 hours, a lot has been taking place. A tentative agreement has been reached between both Republican and Democrat leader. The Speaker of the House has come forward with what we believe is a plan which would reopen the government, would extend the debt limit, and has several other provisions in it. And the reaction to that has been condemnation, immediate, automatic condemnation by the majority leader, by the White House, by the Democrats in the House, absolutely rejecting this proposal. I don't understand that. I don't understand that visceral reaction in a most negative fashion. Why don't we try something like we used to do around this place? Why don't we say, look, you've got a proposal to open the government, we've got a proposal to open the government, let's both pass, let's go to conference, which we could do in 24 hours and resolve our differences. I understand what the polling data says, that 74% of the American people disapprove of the Republican handling of this issue, and I agree with that. Was some of us at the beginning that said we're going on a fool's errand to believe that we will be able to defund Obamacare. And we got ourselves in a ditch. And we got to stop digging. That is well understood here by certainly the overwhelming majority of my Republican colleagues. But for the majority leader and the Democrats in the House and the White House to say absolutely categorically not, we will not consider what the Republicans in the House of Representatives are doing, in my view, is piling on. It's piling on, and it's not right. So I urge my Democrat colleagues, let's sit down and work this out. You've got a proposal from the House. We have a proposal between the two leaders, and let's get this resolved. To categorically reject what the House of Representatives and the Speaker is doing, and I think he's pretty courageous in what he's doing, in my view, is not serving the American people. So let's stop this. Let's stop it, sit down, consider the Speaker's proposal, get our proposal done, and then get this resolved, which we could do in the next 24 hours. I came to the floor to express my disappointment in the categorical rejection of a good faith effort by the Speaker of the House, which doesn't contain provisions all that I want. I'm sure that the agreement that's made by both the Senate majority and Republican leaders will not be everything that I want. So let's stop the condemnation. Let's consider the Republican House proposal as a serious proposal, as a way to end this gridlock, and then let's sit down together and get this thing done. I again urge my Democratic colleagues, we know you have the upper hand. Isn't it time that we help to find a way out of this, which is what the American people want, rather than who won and who lost? The only people that are losing right now are the people of this country. As I've mentioned a couple of times before, al-Qaeda is not in shutdown. I urge my colleagues to reconsider, on the Democrat side in the White House, to reconsider their categoric rejection of any proposal from the House of Representatives. I yield the floor.
We just got confirmation that the House Rules Committee will not meet tonight, and there will not be a vote in the House on a debt limit and spending proposal to reopen the government. Here's the New York Times take on what's been happening on Capitol Hill. On the brink of a historic default, House Republicans on Tuesday abruptly postponed a vote on their latest proposal to open the government and raise the debt limit as a major credit agency warned that the U.S. was on the verge of a costly ratings downgrade. Hardline conservatives and more pragmatic Republicans were in open revolt Tuesday evening after House Republican leadership rushed out a new bill in the afternoon, forcing a postponement of any vote on the measure. With the latest delay, chances increased that a resolution would not be reached before the Treasury exhausted its borrowing authority on Thursday. Here's what Press Secretary Jay Carney said today during the White House briefing just before 1 Eastern this afternoon.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here. Before I take your questions, I just wanted to note that earlier today the President was briefed by senior staff on the effects of the lapse in appropriations, the so-called shutdown. And among the items that he was briefed on was the fact that small businesses are feeling the impact of shutdown as key federal efforts that support small business have been halted. Due to the shutdown, as you know now in its 15th day, the SBA cannot approve new guarantees of loans provided by banks to small businesses. In a typical month, the Small Business Administration approves loans to more than 4,000 small businesses, and halting these loans represents over $1 billion in lost loan assistance to small businesses, thereby jeopardizing thousands of jobs. And you know, again, another consequence of a wholly unnecessary, completely manufactured crisis that is doing harm to our economy, harm to our small businesses, and was brought about by, you know, one faction of one party in one house, in one branch of government, making ideological demands and thereby shutting down the government. With that, I take your questions. Julie.
Thanks, Jay. I wanted to just get a sense of the state of play at this point. Is this the White House's understanding that there is a deal in the Senate that's been finalized between Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell that would lift the ceiling and reopen the government?
The President is pleased with the progress that we've seen in the Senate. It is important to note that the process that's been undertaken in the Senate is bipartisan, that Senators Reid and McConnell have been engaging one another. Democrats and Republicans have been engaging on this issue, and it's all built around the fundamental premise that we should not have shut down the government, that we should reopen the government, and that we must ensure that the United States pays its bills on time, as it always had. And we should do, that Congress should take those actions in a way that does not have partisan strings attached, and that ensures the kind of stability for our economy and for our middle class that they need. So we're pleased with the progress. I would refer you to Senate leaders for the status of those discussions. But we certainly believe that there's a potential there for a resolution to this unnecessary manufactured crisis that can allow us to get back to the important business of helping grow the economy and create jobs and taking action to improve the lives of middle-class Americans that elected officials were sent here to do.
Is the White House confident that that resolution could pass both the Senate and the House ahead of the Thursday deadline for the debt ceiling?
For congressional timing and how...
you guys know the state of play.
There's no question that we are very close to a very important deadline. And time is of the essence. So I think that is why you see some very serious-minded efforts being undertaken in the Senate. And we would hope that the House would also approach this important deadline with the same understanding of just how serious it is.
And in 2011, the U.S. credit rating was downgraded just because the government got so close to a default. Is the White House or Treasury hearing from any of the rating agencies now that we are, again, very close to that deadline without a resolution?
I would refer you to the Treasury Department for those kinds of conversations. If they're taking place, that wouldn't be something I would brief on from here. We know from past experience the difficult lessons learned from 2011 that the serious flirtation with default that House Republicans engaged in 2 years ago led to some pretty negative consequences for our economy, including, as you noted, the United States being downgraded for the first time. So,
the President, in these briefings that you say he's getting every day, is he getting anything from any of these officials about how the rating agencies?
You know, that would not be something that I would brief on from here, because the obviously issues that have to do with market sensitivities are not ones that I would address here. Roberta.
Last week, the President said, in a worst-case scenario, there are things that we'll do. And what if Thursday comes and there's no deal? Has the White House started implementing any of those contingency plans already ahead of, because we're so close?
Well, I would not go further than what the President or the Treasury Secretary have said about that, and I would refer you to Treasury. The Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, testified, as you know, last week, where broadly this issue was discussed. But we are obviously focused on working with members of Congress, leaders in Congress, on an effort to do what we said was essential all along, which was open the government and make sure that the United States pays its bills by extending the debt ceiling, and doing that in a way that we don't simply put us on a trajectory to recreate this crisis again in a few weeks. So we're encouraged by the progress that we've seen in the Senate. But we're far from a deal at this point, and so we hope that progress continues.
What is there about the Senate deal, though, that doesn't recreate the crisis in a few months down the road? What is there in it that doesn't mean we're going to be doing this all again in the year?
There's not a bill for me to analyze for you right now. What I would
the shape of the pending.
Look, I think that every participant in this exercise would hopefully understand that it should not be repeated. not in a few weeks and not in a few months. And when it comes to the fundamental responsibility of Congress to ensure that the United States does not default, not ever. That's certainly the President's view. That is why he has been so insistent that we cannot engage in a process here that then becomes normalized, where a minority in Congress, a faction of one party in one House, can threaten the full faith and credit of the United States if it does not get what it could not get through the normal legislative process or through elections. So, you know, those are the stakes when it comes to the essential responsibility of Congress to ensure that the Department of Treasury can pay our bills.
There do seem to be, though, some strings attached in the deal as it appears to be sort of coalescing or developing. What does the White House make of those strings?
Again, I'm not going to analyze details of a bill that we haven't seen yet and that has not emerged yet. Yeah.
Jay, it seems like the key parts, at least, of the Senate bill, the reinsurance, the income verification. President Obama said, quote, "Nobody gets to threaten the full faith and credit of the United States just to extract political concessions." But if you're open to that, as presumably the White House is, because they're talking to Senate Democrats, isn't that concessions?
Well, again, I think what we have seen in the process thus far that Senator Reid has engaged in is a proposal that would reopen the government and remove the threat of a first-ever U.S. default by raising the debt ceiling. You know, we don't need any more self-inflicted wounds from Congress. The economy is already paying a price, as outside analysts have noted. There is already a cost to the economy and therefore to growth and jobs from this behavior. And it's important, as I think so many Americans believe, that it stop, that Congress simply fulfill its basic responsibilities to open the government, to fund it at, again, levels that were set by Republicans, so that we can get about the business of negotiating in good faith over longer-term budget proposals. I'm not going to...
But there are provisions on... you are talking about the short-term increase in the debt ceiling and the CR. If you're not going to talk about the Obamacare provisions, which are also on the table, I mean, you're talking about the short-term debt ceiling and CR provisions. I mean, even if these are sort of small fry gives on Obamacare, doesn't it violate the principle that the President set out there that he will not negotiate on Obamacare?
Again, until we have a proposal that has emerged from these negotiations in the Senate, I'm not going to, you know, analyze it with you piece by piece. What I can say is we've been encouraged by the progress, and you know, we believe, and the President believes, it's very important that when it comes to the debt ceiling, that we not do what a previous effort in the House would have done, which was try to create a scenario where budget negotiations and the renewal of government funding are once again tied directly to the essential responsibility of Congress to pay our bills, and right before the holidays, which would be a terrible outcome to this process, as every business owner will tell you, and I think many of them have told you, and many of them have told their representatives in Congress.
So does he hold firm to that assertion that he will not negotiate when it comes to Obamacare on the full faith and credit of the U.S. or on the government being shut down?
Yes, he has made clear that, he's made clear two things, Brianna, as you know. He is willing, within the context of broader budget negotiations, within the context of serious-minded and earnest discussions about how to improve the Affordable Care Act, to look at any proposal that might do that, going to Obamacare. And that's true on broader budget issues. But with some of the ideas that we've seen this morning, when it comes to sort of demanding ransom to try to rally Tea Party members in exchange for opening the government or raising the debt ceiling, that's not acceptable, and it has not been through this whole process.
Speaker Boehner, real quickly, is there nothing in the Boehner proposal that's acceptable to you?
Reopening the government and extending the debt ceiling, that's acceptable.
the Obamacare provisions included in the Senate deal?
Again, I think two things. One, as I understand it, there's not a proposal in the House to talk about now, based on the press conference given by House Republican leaders. And based on some of the reporting I've seen since then, that's because they're now going back to try to add some sweeteners for Tea Party members. And the better course of action is the one being undertaken by Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Instead of trying to, once again, craft a measure to ensure full Republican support in the House, why not work on a measure that could get bipartisan support in the House, the way that Republicans and Democrats are trying to do in the Senate? That's certainly what I think is best for the American people. It's what it's the kind of process that the President supports. So with regards to proposals that we haven't seen, it's hard to...
But aren't you cherry-picking which parts you'll talk about? Because you're talking about the short-term funding and debt ceiling increase, but you won't talk about the other items.
Talking about the shutdown and the need to raise the debt ceiling, yeah, that's what we've been talking about for weeks. No, we've said all along that we want a debt ceiling increase for as long as possible because of the need to remove uncertainty from this process. I mean, the very uncertainty that has been created by this manufacturing crisis is what we need to avoid as an economy going forward, and what Washington needs to avoid, because it is already causing harm to the economy. It is already causing uncertainty among Americans, which in turn has them making decisions about how they spend their money, which has a negative impact potentially on the economy. And that creates a cascading effect that can only be bad, which is why we need to, here in Washington, why Congress needs to fulfill its basic responsibilities, reopen the government, and make sure that the full faith and credit of the United States is upheld, as it has been in the past. John.
Hey, Jay, what exactly is the deadline
For
raising the debt ceiling for default?
Well, those are two different things, as we've been explicitly clear